Okay, this is going to be What Were Dr. Mcdougall's Achievements, Part 2. It's from this book, John McDougall, the Doctor Who Fought for You, by me, Pete Rogers. Okay, we're talking about epidemiology. And the big reason to talk about epidemiology is it proves, the greatness of the vegan diet. And basically, the reason why paleo, keto, carnivore will tell you that, epidemiology is bogus is because they don't have any support for their claims for the paleo, keto, carnivore. And it's just overwhelming, the evidence in support of the low-fat vegan diet. It's so typical. A typical thing, I just talked to an internal medicine doctor who goes, gosh, I wish I knew about your diet stuff 15 years ago. I just put one patient on your diet, a couple of weeks later, the guy's dropped his total cholesterol from 230 down to 160, 70 points. And my other guy just goes on your diet for 2 months. He's lost 12 pounds. He's doing better than ever. This stuff is so much better than the pills. Okay, it's obvious. The more you learn about this, I can tell you, I've been a doctor over 30 years. The most powerful thing in all of medicine is the low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet. And the simple reason, it's a species-specific diet for humans. Okay, so let's just take a look at some epidemiology. Here is the Mexican-American border. Here is Pima population in Arizona, the Tarahumara population in northern Mexico. They live in the Sierra Madre Mountains, Copper Canyon area. They used to be a combined population. After Mexican-American War in 1848, the Pima were pulled into Arizona. Okay, then they eat now the SAD diet, standard American diet. Okay, the Tarahumara have kept their old ways. The Mexicans used to be called the people of the corn. Okay, they eat tons of corn, and they eat beans, local greens and stuff. So let's take a look at how are they doing. And the reason why this matters is they're showing that, genetically they're basically about the same population. You can just type into your browser Pima, type into your Pima obesity, type into your browser Tarahumara, and you see all these Pima that used to be skinny and fit, like the Tarahumara back in the late 1800s when they were doing their old ways. Once they taken on the new ways, standard American diet, they're a bunch of train wrecks, okay? Tarahumara, the world famous ultra marathoners. Nathan Pritikin was so impressed by them, he patterned his own diet after the Tarahumara. And you can also see, guy, I think his name is Bill O'Connor, and I think Dr. Esselstyn knows him. He's a pretty well-known researcher in Caldwell Esselstyn, and I think Campbell knows him too. He was out there and he studied them. They all had low cholesterol. I think their average cholesterol is in the ballpark of 135. They don't have coronary artery disease, obesity, hypertension. They're real healthy. Anyways, the average guy in town can run 100 miles in 2 days. Average American guy can't run 10 miles, okay? That's pretty impressive. Versus the Pima, they get all the Western diseases. They plug up all their arteries, go for open heart surgery. They got abdominal pressure syndrome, getting sigmoid resections for diverticulitis, appendectomies for appendicitis. They got gallstones. They get diabetes. They're getting their feet and their legs amputated. All this stuff, okay? It's obvious. You know what I'm saying? The difference between, and some famous people went out there. Ruth Heidrich, the famous marathoner, triathlete, multi-decade survivor of breast cancer, went out there. A patient of Dr. Mcdougall went out there to visit Tarahumara, says they're real. Scott Jurek, the famous ultra-marathoner, went out there. Bill Connor was the guy I told you about, his studies on them. Okay, here's a book written about the Tarahumara. It's called Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. I don't know of him. I don't think he's related to John McDougall. Not that I know of. But anyways, it's a good book. I read it. It's pretty impressive stuff. Okay, and all the epidemiology makes the low-fat vegan diet look good. Here's a story in Kenya. Okay, they eat a lot of diet of fruits, vegetables, starches. They got normal blood pressure for life. That's how it is in plant-based communities. Their blood pressure doesn't change that much from when they're a baby to when they're in their 70s. Okay. Average guy in their 60s in Kenya, they had blood pressure 110/70. They got like the best marathon runners, long distance runners in the world. Kipchoge, the Kenyan guy, ran the marathon 26 miles in under 2 hours. They eat a lot of cornmeal. Okay, let me show you this paper. This real famous blood pressure paper coming out of Kenya. This is a good one to know about. By the way, blacks in the United States have hypertension off the charts. Tons and tons of them have coronary artery disease and strokes from this and kidney failure from this, and it ruins their lives. And, it'd be so useful for them to know about this, to know about the benefits of a low-fat, low-sodium diet. And then with the plants, you get all the potassium, the magnesium, all the good stuff, the nitrate precursors and nitric oxide. So In Kenya, here's the paper, Blood Pressure in the African Native, papers from 1929, Lancet is the journal, Donaldson is the author, and basically 1,800 consecutive admissions, okay? Okay, then the patients were ages, from 15 to 80 years old. What they noticed was that their blood pressures, even improved a little bit as they got older. The author spent 2 years in a native hospital in Kenya where 1,800 patients were admitted. There was not a single case of hypertension. Out of 1,800 patients, no hypertension. Zero hypertension. And that's what I'm saying is the low-fat vegan diet isn't better than paleo, keto, carnivore, low-carb by like a close score. It's not like a close match, 5-4. No, it's 100-0. The only thing the paleo, keto, carnivore, meat diet has is you get more vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is easy to supplement. Okay, as Dr. Mcdougall would say, the lack of vitamin B12 or the low level of vitamin B12 is the only legitimate criticism of the low-fat vegan diet. So that's pretty good stuff. 1,800 patients, no hypertension. Plus all the other populations, they're doing good. They don't get all the stuff the Westerners get. Okay, here's the other story of the Bantu women in South Africa. Okay, in South Africa, these women, they would typically have 9 or 10 children. They don't have birth control pills. And the woman would nurse the baby for anywhere from 2 to 4 years, let's say an average of 3 years. They would have very low dietary calcium, about the equivalent of one little tiny cup of milk, and they don't drink milk. Okay, so the point I'm saying is there's no such thing as dietary calcium deficiency. It's easy to have adequate amounts of calcium. Mcdougall never seen a case. He said he can't find one in the literature. As long as you're not starving, all right, any naturally chosen diet, you're going to get enough calcium. So it's a non-issue. That's not the issue with osteoporosis. And that's what I think is funny. You'll have the American feminist taking calcium supplements, drinking milk, and she's got osteoporosis. She had 1.5 children. Bantu lady's got 10 kids. She's nursing all of them for 3 years. She doesn't have a problem with osteoporosis. That's not the issue, okay? And the milk's got the acidic proteins, and those lead to a low-grade metabolic acidosis, especially the sulfur-containing amino acids, methionine and cysteine, as part of their metabolic degradation through sulfuric acid. So then you got to buffer the pH, and some of that buffering comes from calcium from the muscle, some of it comes from calcium from the bones, and you end up peeing some of your bones out into the toilet, and you become osteoporotic. So, again, I think that's kind of funny. Okay, so how do you avoid it? Just eat your plant-based diet. Forget about that animal protein. Okay, the other thing is there's tons of migration studies. Basically, populations, when they migrate from their traditional countries to the USA, the more Western they become in their diet, the fatter and sicker they get. McDougall's told all the stories of how he would work. He worked a lot in Hawaii, and then he's in California, of course. So he sees a lot of Asians coming over into Hawaii and California. And basically, the old folks were still eating the old white rice diet. They're all skinny and healthy. And then the middle-aged ones that are started trending into Westernism are fatter and sicker. And then the kids are, fatsos because they've been going down the Western path. And the Okinawans used to be some of the longest lived people in the whole world, back when they were eating lots of sweet potatoes and a plant-based diet. Now they put fast food places into Okinawa. Okinawa is kind of like what Hawaii is to USA. Okinawa is kind of that to Japan. And yeah, I knew some people from Okinawa, and they tell me, they're real hard working. They don't even have cars, most of them. There's a lot of farmers, real strong sense of respect. The kids are expected to respect the elders and to out-achieve them academically. There's a lot of peer pressure on the kids. Okay, the incidence of prostate cancer, for example, back in like Japan, used to be next to nothing when they ate a plant-based diet primarily. Let's see, the Japanese migrant studies, all the migrant studies for whatever the country, that when they used to eat a plant-based diet, the more westernized they get, the fatter and sicker, the more coronary artery disease, diabetes, hypertension they get. That's just how it is. Okay, the Seventh-day Adventists used to be super healthy because they're vegans, and that's not even the healthiest of them. The more low-fat, they'd be better off. That's a whole other topic. We're not getting to that right now. Here's the Finland Karelia Project. Finland back in the 1960s used to have very high levels of cardiovascular mortality. In the 1970s, about 1972 to 1977, under the guidance of Pekka Puska, he's an MD, PhD researcher there, they did the Karelia Project, where they trained the wives to prepare more of a plant-based diet for the men. They got them eating more even frozen fruits through the winter, and just they switched out some of their dietary sodium chloride, typical salt, for potassium chloride. They had an incredible 84% drop in cardiovascular mortality. That's incredible. That's huge. So that was pretty impressive. The Plant Chompers guy made a nice video about that. He actually got Pekka Puska on there. He's got some clout, that guy, to interview people. He says I'm too divisive, and he won't interview me, but he interviewed Pekka Puska, and it's good. It's a good video. I enjoyed watching it. It's nice to see the people from the place. Okay, let's see what else. Industrial Revolution made a lot of people a lot more wealthy, and then, fat, and they started having refrigerators, of course, and once they had refrigerators, now it's much easier for people to eat meat all year round in grocery stores. Okay, as Dr. Mcdougall points out, 1 billion out of 1 billion Asians are skinny when they eat a rice-based diet. Okay, in Peru, where they eat potatoes, the people are still skinny. In Papua New Guinea, where they eat 93% of their calories from sweet potatoes, the people are thin and healthy. Okay, here's some references if you want to look some of that stuff up. And all large populations, Dr. Mcdougall quote here, all large healthy populations are starch-based. There are no exceptions. Okay? And he says, good health is attractive because people want to mate with somebody who's healthy. They want them to survive and help raise the kid. Okay, and then Dr. Mcdougall's quote here, basically all animal foods provide about the same nutrition and have roughly the same impact on your health. The 5 major poisons in the animal foods are excessive fat, 15 times more fat than plant foods, excessive cholesterol, excessive animal protein, excessive methionine, sulfur-containing amino acid, more acid in general. Okay, they're rather acidic. Here's a comparison of the methionine in different foods per 100 calories of food. So with the potato, 35 milligrams. You can take a look at salmon, 318, basically about 10 times as much. Egg whites, 20 times as much methionine, the real acidic amino acid. Okay, salmon, a lot of people say salmon's a good food. No, it's for idiots. Okay, it's 50% fat, 50% protein. That's for chumps. Okay, we talked about it before. Low fat, low sodium vegan diet. You're low risk for all these common diseases versus American diet. You're moderate to high risk or moderate to high risk for all of them. Okay, it's for chumps. All right, the rice-based diet, like Japan, Korea, China, East Asian diet, was actually pretty good because they combined white rice with vegetables. What got them into trouble is they put tons of salt on it and they were smoking cigarettes like chimneys. Okay, but the diet itself was pretty good. The Indian diet, we talked about that before. The biggest problem in the Indian diet is too much fried food, omega-6, and that causes them a lot of grief, a lot of diabetes, a lot of myocardial infarctions. Low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet, like I said, it's the best. Oh, here's a slide. This is the slide that makes some people go apeshit bananas. They go crazy with this slide because this is a truth that people don't like you to know. But I'm going to tell you some of the dirty little secrets of veganism, all right? Walter Kempner had the incredible rice diet, and he has incredible results from that. He just gave him Uncle Ben's white rice, some fruits. Dr. Mcdougall calls that the diet for the nearly dead, okay? There's some other people who call their diet raw is the law, and these are like fruitarians almost. They eat tons of just raw foods. Michael Arnstein, he's a famous ultramarathoner guy. He moved to Hawaii to make fruits more readily available year-round. Ruth Heidrich also lives in Hawaii, the triathlete marathoner, multi-decade survivor of breast cancer. She started out eating the Mcdougall diet when she talked to him back in the 1980s. She's still alive, and with metastatic breast cancer. And then she later on switched to eating more of a raw diet because she found it more convenient. There's the raw till 4 type of stuff that Durian Ryder often talks about with his ex-girlfriend, Freely the Banana Girl. And Garth Davis was pretty impressed by a lot of fruitarian types. Okay, then the next sort of less strict is these guys, but more strict than mainstream veganism is sort of where I'm coming from. The Spartan vegan, medical monk diet, bad boy veganism diet. And basically it's very low in fat. I don't eat anything except starches, fruits, and vegetables. That's it. Always organic, always only one ingredient. Filter the water, no caffeine, no oils, of course, okay? So that's Spartan veganism, which is real simple. The only thing I need to know for cooking is I just boil water. Okay, then the next level, and this is the diet. I jokingly wrote on here vegan extremism. That's a joke because in Wikipedia they slandered Dr. Mcdougall. They said he's a vegan zealot. He's a vegan extremist. Okay, it's all BS. They know it's the best diet. They just don't want other people to buy into it. Because if people ate this way, they wouldn't be sick, okay? So the healthcare system wouldn't make so much money off them. So the McDougall diet, I think, is something mainstream enough. This is something that the public actually could do. He doesn't insist on organic, whereas I do. I'm a little more strict. Because my goal is not just to take the average old person and get them to be reasonably healthy. My goal is, what's the best you could do? So I don't want to do anything that I don't think is the best you could do. So that's why I only eat organic food. But I realize for other people it costs more money and it's a pain in the butt to only eat organic. So I can get why that's not made a strict thing. Esselstyn doesn't require organic either. Okay, I set Esselstyn diet as separate because he tends to emphasize eating lots and lots of greens all day. He doesn't allow any nuts or oils. If you're trying to lose weight, you definitely don't want nuts, oils, seeds, or avocados, the real high-fat stuff. But anyways, that would be what I would call doable vegan diet for large amounts of the population. All right? And then where people get really pissed off is when I tell the truth about the fact that there's a lot of really famous vegans out there, and they're recommending what I would consider moderate to high fat. They're very pro on soy. They're very pro on olive oil, pro encouraging of omega-3, of nuts, of seeds. They'll call these good fats. I would try to minimize all these fats. Like Pritikin has said, fat is bad. I think that's a bad idea. But I'm just letting you know, that's actually the most popular school of veganism. But I don't think that the data supports it that well. You could say, well, that's kind of close to what the Seventh-day Adventists were, a lot of them. But I can also tell you, McDougall said he worked with the Seventh-day Adventist population. And he said a lot of the Seventh-day Adventist vegans were eating some like junk food veganism and fat veganism stuff. And he thought they could do better. And that's when they had about 88.5 years survival on the women, the men about 85 years, the longest lived people ever in the history of the world. That's well documented. So anyways, that's what the controversy was about. And trust me, people go crazy about the fact that I divide these two groups. Because they are different, okay? There's a difference. And they often in this group will promote olive oil. Not all of them. Certainly some of them don't. But I'm just telling you, if you want to know the hot spot that pisses people off in veganism, this is it right here. The dividing line between what I would call the really low-fat veganism versus the moderate fat, and some of them are even high-fat veganism. That drives people crazy in the vegan world. Okay, animal rights vegans. The animal rights vegans are people who do it because they care about animals. I'm not that impressed by animal rights vegans because a lot of the ones I've seen that care about say they care about animals, they don't care about people. So, I care about people a lot more than I care about animals. Plus, just so you know, I was considering being a wildlife biologist when I was young, and I actually hung around with a lot of people that went into environmentalism, some of the most famous people in the world in that field, when I was at Stanford and stuff. And I can tell you what disillusioned me with that crowd was they didn't care about people. They just wanted, like, they would say things like, you don't need to manage the animals. All you got to do is manage the people. We need to get the people off the land, They would want to, support companies that would buy land, and they would say it would be to, help the nature. But what would happen is the people in those companies to buy land a lot of times would then move in on the land themselves. So the people supporting their company were just a bunch of chumps to buy them houses, okay? I thought that was pretty stupid. But I just didn't like the way they didn't like farmers. I had known a lot of farmers, and I liked them. Farmers are hardworking, honest, nice people. They give us food. They're our friend. I don't care what they're growing. They could eventually change to growing more plant food if they're not. But I like the farmers. So anyways, that's one of the reasons why I know the environmental movement better than you would think. And I'm not impressed by it. I don't think they're that much of a friend to mankind. And I think they're a bunch of hypocrites. Because I know them. And I know what they would do. And they would do things that are not in the interest of the population. Not at all. And they're not really that good for the environment either. A lot of hypocrisy in that. Okay, what else? Lacto-ovo pesco vegan. That's better than a frank Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet's a big joke. Just so you know, almost all the big medical centers, including the Ivies and the real famous medical centers, are going to recommend Mediterranean diet. Plus, you'll talk to a lot of medical people who consider themselves well-educated. And then when you ask them about nutrition, they go, oh, I've heard the Mediterranean diet's very good. That's a sign that they're an ignoramus and they haven't read anything. They haven't thought about it deeply. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just trying to sound well-informed, but they don't know what they're talking about. The Mediterranean diet is the Antichrist diet. It promises salvation, but it doesn't deliver. The best optimized version of it, like in the Lyon study, Esselson's diet was more than 30 times better than that, about something like 32 times better than that for prevention of coronary heart disease. It's a joke, okay? And the regular Mediterranean people eat much worse than that. It's full of terrible foods. Olive oil, chicken and fish and eggs and alcohol and stupid canola oil. It's just completely stupid. And that gets recommended by Ivy League schools, by famous medical centers for all kinds of things. Okay, so that's all we got for that. So this will be part 2 of the chapter on Dr. McDougall's achievements. That's it for today. Hope that was helpful.